My husband, Danish, was never the type of man who roused suspicion. He had always presented himself as the man who believed in discipline, in loyalty, in moral superiority. So I never checked his phone. I never questioned his late meetings. I never followed his stories too deeply. I lived like a woman who trusted her marriage blindly, because I believed trust itself was a sign of strength. I never realized that trust can also be the weapon that destroys you from the inside out. Our marriage was not a fairy tale, but it was stable. We had a comfortable apartment, predictable routines, polite conversations over dinners, and occasional weekends with friends. One of those friends was Farhan. He was Danish's oldest friend since college. A charming talker, a man who carried a confident grin, as if he always knew more than he spoke. I respected their friendship. I admired the depth of their bond. I didn't know that admiration would transform into regret later. I first noticed the change in Danish's behavior 3 months ago. His silence was heavier. His gaze was distracted. Sometimes he seemed present, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. His phone became an extension of his hand, always facing down, always protected by fingerprint lock. And yet, I convinced myself his stress at work had increased. I convinced myself nothing serious had shifted. That's the thing about women who love deeply. We justify the very signs that destroy us. One Friday evening, he returned home unusually excited. He told me Farhan needed a place to stay for a few days. I nodded and asked why. The explanation was casual, the usual, small misunderstanding with landlord. I didn't think much. We had an extra room. It wasn't a problem. And Farhan was familiar to me. I'd known him for years. I had shared countless meals with him. I had celebrated birthdays with him. How could a threat be hiding in someone I already accepted? But that night, as I prepared the guest room, I caught a glimpse of Danish glancing at his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his shirt, smoothing his hair, checking his jawline. It was a detail so tiny that most people would ignore it. But something stirred inside me. Why was he suddenly so aware of his appearance, when he was at home, with me? I swallowed the suspicion. I stored it inside. I didn't ask anything. The next day, Farhan arrived with luggage, loud jokes, and an energy that filled the living room like a showman entering a stage. My husband looked unusually relaxed around him, too relaxed. Their laughter felt coded. The glances at each other seemed loaded. I didn't know the reason. I only knew the feeling, the uncomfortable sensation of being an outsider in my own house. What I didn't realize in that moment was this. The story of my heartbreak had already started, and I was standing right inside the beginning, without knowing where the end would take me. Farhan's presence in our home felt harmless at first. He treated me kindly, complimented my cooking, and carried an effortless charm that made him socially magnetic. I couldn't deny he had a personality that made people lean closer, listen longer, smile wider. Yet every time he spoke to me, I noticed how Danish watched us carefully, not with jealousy, but almost as if he was analyzing, judging, measuring something invisible between us. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But the more days passed, the more I felt like I had been placed into a silent test that I never agreed to take. Whenever Danish stepped out for a call, Farhan remained in the living room scrolling his phone with a smirk forming and fading on his face. He would look at me briefly, then back at his screen. It was subtle, but his eyes had a specific intention behind them. Not attraction, not disrespect, but some kind of secret knowledge. As if he knew something I didn't. As if he was playing with information only he possessed. 2 nights later, I overheard their whispered conversation from the hallway near the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the tone carried a weight that made me freeze. Danish sounded unusually cautious, almost nervous. Farhan's voice, in comparison, was steady and amused, the voice of someone in control, someone comfortable. The tiny portion of words I managed to catch was enough to inject fear into my veins. Just trust me. She's exactly how you described. Exactly how you described. Who? Me. I backed away before they noticed. I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed with my heart beating in my throat. That line replayed inside my head like an echo bouncing inside an empty chamber. My husband had been describing me to his friend. But for what purpose? In what context? In what detail? I couldn't understand. From that night onward, my posture changed. I became more observant. I studied their body language. I listened to every tone shift. I began to compare the way Danish interacted with me alone versus how he acted when Farhan was also in the room. Eventually, I realized something disturbing. My husband was more emotionally comfortable around his friend than me. He laughed more genuinely. He spoke more openly. He smiled more frequently, and I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. The man who once used to share his burdens with me now shared them with Farhan, and that shift cut deeper than any argument. One evening, they went out together. When they returned, both were in unusually good moods. They walked in with bags of snacks and drinks as if they had enjoyed a private adventure. I wanted to ask where they went, what they talked about, who they met, but I felt like I had no right. I felt like I would appear paranoid, insecure, dramatic. So I remained silent. I swallowed curiosity and let them enjoy their secret world. I didn't know yet that silence was the doorway to my downfall. Because the secret they were hiding was darker than anything I could imagine. One evening, after dinner, Danish said he needed to step out for an urgent work meeting. He left quickly, in a rush, not even finishing his tea. I took his dishes to the kitchen, then began cleaning up quietly. Farhan remained seated in the living room, scrolling his phone with a soft smirk playing near the edge of his lips. After a few minutes, he spoke without looking up. "He left you again tonight, interesting." His tone wasn't sympathetic, it was evaluative, like he was checking a reaction. I didn't reply. I continued washing dishes, my hands trembling in the running water. The silence between us felt sharp, stretched, deliberate. After a while, Farhan put his phone down. He stood slowly and walked closer to the kitchen counter. For the first time since he arrived, he lowered his voice in a serious tone and said, "Do you know why Danish wanted me to stay here?" I kept my back to him. "Because of his landlord issue," I replied dryly. Farhan laughed softly, not mockingly, but with the tone of someone who found a lie amusing. "That story was for you," he murmured. "Not for me." I paused. The water continued running. My heartbeat was louder than the faucet. He leaned slightly on the countertop. "He wanted to prove something," he continued. "About you." I turned slowly and looked at him. His face was relaxed. Calm. Too calm. "Prove what?" I asked. "Your loyalty," he said simply. His eyes held mine with a cold confidence. He wanted to see if you were as loyal as you pretend to be. Or if you could be tempted. My stomach twisted. I felt nausea climb up my chest. "Tempted by who?" I asked, though I already understood. "By me," he answered directly. I stood frozen. My breath felt stolen from my lungs. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Why?" I whispered. He shrugged lightly. "Because he's not sure anymore. About you. About your feelings for him. About where your heart really is." Then he paused, letting the silence stab deeper. "He said you were distant recently. That you seemed uninterested. So he asked me to observe. To analyze you." My throat tightened painfully. "Observe what exactly?" I demanded. Farhan crossed his arms. "How you respond. How you react when he leaves you alone. How you treat attention, compliments, or flirtation." My voice cracked. "So, this was a test." He nodded once. "A cruel test, yes. But also a partnership experiment between us." He wanted clarity before he makes a decision. "What decision?" I asked, barely breathing. Farhan inhaled deeply, then exhaled. "Whether to end this marriage." My knees weakened. The ground beneath me felt unstable. He added one more sentence. Quiet, calculated, final. "He asked me to break you just enough, so he could see the truth." I stared at him, my eyes burning, my trust shattered. I realized I was never being protected. I was being studied. And the man I loved wasn't trying to save our marriage, he was trying to justify destroying it. I waited for Danish to return that night. Farhan went to his room, leaving me alone with a stomach full of poison. Hours passed. My mind replayed every moment of our marriage, every suppressed argument, every dismissal, every subtle disrespect I had normalized. I remembered birthdays where he forgot what cake I liked. I remembered anniversaries he treated like ordinary days. I remembered all the times I interpreted his indifference as stress. I had been romanticizing abandonment. I had been protecting a man who had already emotionally left me long before this test even began. When Danish finally came home, he looked completely normal, tired, distracted, scrolling his phone as he walked in. I watched him remove his shoes, loosen his tie, and sit on the sofa like he always did. He didn't know that his secret was no longer secret. He didn't know that the reality he hid so confidently had been placed naked in front of me. I sat down opposite him, and my voice came out quieter than I expected. "So, was I loyal enough for you?" He froze. His eyes lifted from his phone, his expression turning sharply alert. A flicker of panic crossed his face, but he tried to mask it quickly. He attempted a casual tone. "What are you talking about?" I smiled, not a smile of happiness, but the kind of smile a person makes when they understand the full truth of a betrayal. Farhan told me everything. His face stiffened instantly. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he stood up and walked toward the window, running his hand through his hair like a man who had been caught in a trap he built himself. "He wasn't supposed to say anything," he muttered under his breath. That sentence broke me more than anything else ever could. Not because he admitted the deception, but because even at that moment, he didn't care about how I felt. He only cared that his plan had been revealed too early. That told me everything about where I stood in his priorities. I should have screamed. I should have thrown things. I should have collapsed. But instead, something inside me hardened. It was the moment I realized I was done being the woman who waited for affection like a beggar. I stood up slowly and spoke in a steady, quiet voice. "If you need to test your wife's loyalty by offering her to your friend, you already should know your marriage was dead long before this." He looked at me, speechless. I picked up my phone, walked to the bedroom, and locked the door behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I didn't demand answers or apologies. Instead, I opened a blank note on my phone and typed one single sentence. "I will not fight to keep a man who fought so hard to lose me." The next morning, I packed my bag. I didn't wait to see Farhan. I didn't wait for Danish to wake up. I left quietly, with dignity, with my soul intact. And as I walked out of that door, I realized something. Sometimes the biggest revenge is simply leaving them with the emptiness they created themselves.